21, reports, specifically reports to management. This gets to the whole idea that a quality system includes the whole system of responsibility for the quality of the data. So by management, this means everybody who manages or is associated with managing this project and who might be responsible in some way for the quality of the data. In general, especially if you're doing continuous monitoring, you're going to have some sort of monthly activity summary. If you're only gathering samples once every 6 months, then obviously that is inapplicable. But if you're doing continuous monitoring where you're gathering data every day or even a few times a week, you're probably going to want to have a report of your activity, even if it's just to the file, but then there's a documented report of your activity over that month period. Specifically for the QAPP, they're interested in whether you did the QC checks that you were supposed to do this month, and then any scheduling problems. So in general, that would be part of a monthly activity summary that includes a QC portion, but quarterly reports include a summary of the data, specifically the validation part, how much data was collected versus how much was actually deemed valid. And the internal quarterly report is a place where you have internal review prior to your releasing it to the public, oftentimes an EPA national database. So that's the quarterly review is an opportunity for your management to say, hey, why did you invalidate all this data? And you can get your ducks in a row before you release it to somebody else's database. And then the annual report, where in terms of the data, you're going to be looking at trends. So you might be summarizing over season, and then you're going to be making interpretations like we are experiencing a drought, which has increased PM concentrations. And then you may say, we reviewed data from nearby sites and this is consistent, where you step back and assess the data and what interpretations you can draw from it, keeping in mind the objectives of your whole monitoring program. Data validation reports. These are very important because these document basically what data you have judged to be valid and what data you have judged to be invalid and why. So there are going to be other people monitoring for this same pollutant with this same method, and they're going to be going through the same exercise. So try to look at what information is out there regarding summaries of this pollutant measured in this sort of way using this sort of method. As much as possible, try to standardize your data validation procedure, and then this part of your QAPP is a bit easier to write because you could say our data validation follows the steps that are outlined in our data validation report template, which is an attachment. And basically you just go through whatever is expected for that method. And also codes, so a map of codes either from your instrumentation, your data logger, your data management system, and then also whatever national database where you're mapping your data into. So any list of codes, the meanings are attached as part of that report so people can understand when they go through and look at the data that you judge to be valid or invalid and why, they can understand what the meanings of these codes are. The data validation report, especially when you have a significant amount of data judged to be invalid, needs to have some sort of independent QA function associated with it, so that, in other words, the site operator is not the same person making the final decision on to validate or invalidate data that they've been collecting, that there's somebody else who is helping them in those validation decisions. And that's particularly important in terms of data validation because that makes a big difference in terms of your contractual requirements pertain to completeness. So you want to have as much valid data as possible, and that's another reason why it's important to have this independent QA function. So this person doesn't have to have all sorts of training. They have to mostly be somebody who is willing to ask dumb questions and say, I don't understand this and let's Google it, etc. Somebody who is going to ask questions and get them answered and has no financial interest in the grant. And then the data validation report also has to discuss who is responsible for the quality of the data. Oftentimes that's a department head. Data summary reports In general, they'll follow the same sort of pattern, but quarterly data summary reports will be brief. This is what the average concentrations were this quarter, and they're not going to draw conclusions. They're going to be tentative, like they're not going to say, oh, this is clearly showing an increase because it's only been a quarter. Whereas the annual data summary reports are going to be more thorough, summarizing the data over a year, and more conclusive. For you to know when you're writing your QAPP what you need to include in your data summary report, there should be something online for the method, for the pollutant, about what summary statistics that pertains to whatever regulation you're gathering your data to compare against. It's like the average over the year. Things like the fourth highest concentration over each year and the average of that, or something like that. But whatever that is going to be in your data summary report. And a lot of times that's called the design value. Your data summary reports will include comparisons. So this is going to be less on a quarterly basis and more on an annual basis, where you compare your results to the previous year. You're comparing your results to other sites, nearby sites, and you're reporting on anything unexpected like spikes or a actual decrease. And then completeness. So that's obviously very important. And then any interpretations or recommendations, because after all, the whole point of this is leading to protection of the environment, including improving people's health. For instance, for monitoring in accordance with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, there is the Air Quality Index. So that's something that you would put into your template report and say, we'll always report on the Air Quality Index, because associated with that are recommendations for example, it's usually old people and babies should stay inside. And then, of course, the design values. Have we met the standard, and the implications of whether or not that standard has been exceeded in terms of recommendations. So again, if you are gathering data to compare against the standard, part of your reports are going to be what you're going to do with that data and conclusions based in general on the health effects of whatever it is you're monitoring for.